No lines. Originally, there were no lines. There was land. There were people.
What would we do without these lines we created?
Why these lines? Where did they come from?
In this valley, there was a kind of early metropolis before the colonial genocide. A place where tribal people gathered for trade and celebration, especially in the winter months. This was considered a mild climate, and people wintered here. Can you believe that? Well, it was. A land of great fertility and profit. No lies.
Can we erase them? It would take a great will of the people.
Where are we headed if we don't make change?
No lines. A land of great fertility and profit.
The universe was created by a dreamer, Kitch Manitou, who saw all that was possible and dreamed it into being. The air, the water, the earth, the greens, the mountains, the valleys, the animals on land and the swimmers of the seas and the riders of the air, all in balance. Kitch Manitou left them alone for a long, long time. When he came back to visit his dream again, he saw that something else was possible. He had another dream. One more thing he could dream into being. A special creature like himself who can dream. He wanted these creatures to have visions and see new possibilities for themselves and others. So he passed along his own godly essence. An essence that makes everything possible.
We can see the possibilities.
Only possibilities.
No lines. Originally.
No lines.
I've lived here all my life. Born in 1952. Seen a lot of changes in that time. But one thing that I noticed, it would like these lines. Like when I leave and I come back. Like if I go to someplace like New York or Atlanta where I have friends and family, if I go to these places and come back, here's what I see. Lines. Like this one between Calvin and Benjamin. Backed. Boom. Backed. You got Benjamin with a not so tidy look to it, though I take care of my yard pretty good. And most of these houses is rentals and not owned by the folks living in them. And there's a crack house on this street. Yes, ma'am, I ain't pointing it out to you, but open your eyes and you'll see it. There's poverty on this street, some gang violence, trouble brewing everywhere. Then boom, you go one street over and it's an entirely different world. And a lily white one at that. Quiet, tidy, peaceful. But who drew that line? Where'd it come from? You tell me that and you got something to write about. Those is lines. Open your eyes, pay attention, and you'll see them.
The boundaries were, as I recall,
So the
division
boundaries
between
are
white
changed.
people,
Are you
property
serious?
owners,
Subdivision
property
has
owners,
not
person that
been
was in the
allowed.
whole area from
That's
white
boundary
all
change.
the way to the Pacific to Mass.
East side of
The
town,
boundary
where north, my parents were
when the
turning
color
their
line was
west.
breached in the 1960s in the avenue where the color line was breached in Grand Rapids.
I came here in third grade. We could not choose where to live because of the monies, so we live on Granville Avenue. You know the Latino quarter? You cannot choose where to live unless you have monies, or unless you are white. We live Granville Avenue.
Jefferson, Lafayette, Division, Michigan, College, Union, Prospect, Washington, 3 Mile, Monroe, Ionia, Ottawa, Pearl, Fulton, Fuller, Woking, Pleasant, Bemis, Baxter, Burton, Diamond, Cherry Lake, Hall, Giddings, Alger, Franklin, 28th Street, Kalamazoo, East Paris, Cascade, Lyon, Fountain, Raymond, Madison, Belline, Richmond, Plainfield, Leonard, and Coit, Alpine, Thomas, Sherman, Ethel, Giddings, Granville, Benjamin, Plymouth, Burton, Eastern, Georgia, Dixon, Stanley, Ray, Cass.
So I'm a housing expert, and I've lived here for a long time, and I've worked in this field for a long time.
So in Grand Rapids, 4 of the major banks in the city collapsed in 1933, the great banking failure that started in Detroit and radiated out across the country. Then in 1936, the city performed what is called the first photo survey. These assessments are going to begin to be used to assess risk. This is the real origins of redlining.
In literally all of in most neighborhoods where black and Hispanic people live, insurance companies literally took a pen with a red pen and drew lines and said that those are the neighborhoods that we're not gonna, that they're not worth investing in. Neighborhoods of color, we call it redlining.
Now we call it steering, and it's illegal, but it still happens. And some of those red lines still stick if you look at where the original boundaries were in 1933 and how they've sometimes shifted, sometimes not. I can buy a house anywhere I want, but can my Latino, my black counterpart, who might be every bit as successful as me?
I grew up in a new black area. It was called Auburn Hills, and there were a lot of professional people there. Teachers, middle class. People say Grand Rapids lacks the black middle class, or at least the true presence of one. So it was a really big thing back then for these black businessmen to buy up this land and build houses. So we moved there in the late 60s and early 70s. Whatever happened to that hope of that place?
My family lived west of Division Street, and then Mom, she moved us east, breaking the color line back in the 70s. And white people started moving out. I watched it, and I had to be bussed over to Burton Street southeast side. And we were the only black kids on the bus. And there were deaf kids and developmentally disabled kids. And I had to ask my mom, what's wrong with us?
I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story.
I want to tell you a story.
I want to tell you a story.
About trying to buy a house just a few years back.
About attempting to buy my house.
About when I bought my house. It was really frightening, you know. Here I am, right out of college and buying my first house. I found one, though. Starter home on the southeast side. Fine place. I still live there.
And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I mean, you know, I had a job, a good job, and I wanted to start a family. Yeah, this was a few years ago. And I found a home, one that was in foreclosure after the fall, you know.
We wanted to start a family, and I have my GED and the job, a steady job, and we tried to buy. It's after the mortgage crisis, and my mom and dad, they lost their home and land and are now living with me and my sister. And so I'm setting out to start the family over. And we find a house close to where they had lived before, west of Division Avenue.
And the mumbo-jumbo jargon of these real estate and bank people, you know, and I've got a college degree and I can't even make my way through this stuff. You know, and I've just got to trust that everything's going to be okay. So I fill out the application online, no problem. And then I went into the mortgage office to, you know, meet with the bank guy, and I got pre-approved. Yeah, this was in 2010.
So I applied for a loan for it at my bank. I'd rather not mention the name, because at the time it's under legal review. And that loan process was not a bright spot for me. I didn't know nothing. And you know, I felt like when we were in the office filling stuff out, my wife's got these long nails, you know how ladies do. And this white bank clerk lady asks her,
How do you write with those?
They're so long.
Do you work? Yeah, she really asked her that. And my wife responds,
Yes, honey. I'm a paralegal at a major law firm here in town.
White girl.
Oh,
really? Shit.
We applied for loan for the house, and my wife, she worked too as a cleaning and nanny, and sometimes she worked for a restaurant too. And they won't even take our application seriously, say we don't have enough proof of stable income. We just get dismissed.
And we don't get the loan, and we are pursuing it. We live in an apartment in East Kentwood now and are looking to try to buy again.
You know, and I thought the loan process was hard and stuff, you know, with all that jargon and such, but we got the house. I mean, probably like by the width of a hair, by the skin of our teeth, but we got it.
What we do at the Fair Housing Center is we have a pool of volunteers who are fully trained as testers. And we will send an African-American tester and a Caucasian tester. And they will have the same credit score, same income, be from the same area. So everything is controlled except their race. And we will get the information back from the testers and compare them side by side. African Americans are quoted higher rental rates, shown less favorable units, shown units in the back with fewer amenities, and this is something that we see over and over again.
Less than 2% of people pursue a fair housing violation for several reasons. Whether it's that they don't know that they've been discriminated against, or if they do know, they don't know where to go. And that's the other thing, or it might not be their most immediate need. That's the thing, people just want to move on and forget. But there are some people who say, I want to stand up so this never happens to anyone else again. But for some people, it is so painful that they just want to move on and leave it behind.
I had a case with a family. It was a husband, a wife, and 2 kids. And they were middle income, and they sold their house because the wife worked for a company that transferred her to Columbus. And so there were these apartments and townhomes right near the school, and that's where they wanted to live for, about 6 months just to finish out the school year. And so they went there. It was a family of 4. They went there and were told that 4 people could not live in any of the townhomes. The 3-bedroom townhomes were limited to no more than 3 people. So we did testing and we found evidence to support that it was different information provided based on race. And they decided to file the case. And when the father was deposed, he had tears streaming down his face. And he testified, but he said, when I had to look at my children, I had worked every day of my life. My wife had worked every day of her life so that we wouldn't have to face this kind of discrimination. And when I had to look my children in the eye and say, they don't want us to live here because of the color of our skin. And it was so humiliating for him. In front of his children, to have to admit that, it was devastating.
We're finding evidence of differences in treatment based on race in over 40% of our tests right now, which is substantial.
Normally we find evidence in 33% of the tests that we do. Here today it is 46 with regard to race. 46%. Well, when my family first moved to Grand Rapids, my parents decided to live on the southeast side of town where they were told there were better schools. But very quickly we moved to East Grand Rapids because the Garfield Park area where we were living was already experiencing some violence.
So I came to look at homes with my mother in May 2008 without hardly knowing the area at all. And I had gone to Marie Catreves as part of my job interview, so the real estate agent starts suggesting these homes in the nearby Baxter neighborhood. And I bought this house after like a day and a half of looking. And when I first moved in, my reaction was, whoa, what's up with all these homes?
Wait, can I go back to that question about where I live for a sec? I want to be clear that what I mean by living in a white part of town, it's not that I don't want people who are different around me, but I want to be safe. I mean, I need to be sure that when my kids are playing on the street or whatever, that they're safe. And I feel that here, or I should say I felt that here until there was that shooting a couple of weeks back, and then the holdup at the grocery.
Broken window theory. These are small signs of disrepair that signal a larger sense of community disinterest, or a lack of a kind of, just a kind of blocked consciousness.
And that's why we're moving again. I don't think there's any question that when you look at the houses in this neighborhood, you can tell where the white people live and where the black people live. You can tell.
When I first moved in, that summer after I first moved in, it was really noisy. And the funny thing is, that's all the college students, so not the black families. So the first struggle that I had is, how do I have this conversation with a college student where they're not getting all defensive? And eventually I just called the cops. I became that guy. So anyway, since my colleagues no longer buy in the area, they all buy in Midtown. They'd like to buy in Heritage Hill, but it's too expensive.
Are you so concerned about this city? Where do you live at? Do you live in the city? You so concerned about the public schools. Do you live near a Grand Rapids public school or the school district that you want to support? Now, tell me that isn't a sincere indicator of racism. I'm moving away from you because I don't want to be infected by what ails you. And unfortunately, people of color have been trained that in order to move up in life, I got to move out. I don't like myself. I don't like my people.
I don't think it's necessarily that my colleagues don't want to live in the area, but I do think that there is a certain kind of code for, I don't want to live around black people. And I don't know what that's about. I just think that people want to live around the resources they feel are essential, like Martha's Vineyard. Come on, if you are a striver, if you are a white striver in Grand Rapids, you know about Martha's Vineyard.
Crime increases in an urban community because people move out. White flight, Caucasians. This is a Caucasian-driven phenomenon for over the last 30 years. Well now, who are the only people moving out of the city now? People of color. Who are moving back? Middle-class Caucasians. It's the epicenter of gentrification.
It usually means that it comes in with people who are non-long-term members of the neighborhood.
Well, there are two definitions.
I've always kind of had the sense that I think white families can move into black neighborhoods with a lot less flap than the reverse.
There's the PR definition of gentrification is when a community that has collapsed is being revitalized by renewed investment.
When our first African American moved into my neighborhood on the west side, it sent the neighborhood all a Twitter.
And then there's the other definition, which is like when all the white people come back.
And nobody did anything weird, nobody flipped out, but they definitely were like, uh-oh, here they come.
And you know, I think those are just two different ways of thinking about the same thing that's happening here right now.
Oh, they said it all right. I, in fact, give my neighborhood a lot of credit. They were very upfront. They were like, great, they're coming up the hill now. It's all downhill from here.
You know, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a billboard off of the Wealthy Street exit, and it said something like, "Come to Woodland." I think there's some apartments out there on 60th and Eastern. Anyway, it said something like, "Come here, it's safe and it's quiet." And as soon as I saw that, I remember thinking, looked to me like the white folk want the people to move out of the city so they can come back.
I've gotten into so many arguments with my colleagues where they'll find out where I live and say, "Oh my God, you live in the hood." Wealthy Street is a line. Most of my colleagues won't live south of Wealthy. They see that as the hood. They'll refer to that as the ghetto.
When I drive down Wealthy Street, when I turn right off of Madison onto Wealthy, I get so angry. I cannot even describe it to you. I get so angry.
So let's take a look at this thing called gentrification that nobody really wants to talk about and deal with, especially middle-class white folks who want to live in a certain area and are willing to overlook certain things in order for that to happen.
My family came to Grand Rapids in the late 70s from Vietnam. I wasn't born yet, so I'm telling you my family's story about what happened to us. Immigrants, refugees, we were placed in a certain apartment that was actually like 3 apartments and 1 older house, but there were many of us. So we needed more than just a normal apartment, but we lived there for a long, long time. And my family, we are working class, low income, and we save up to try to buy this house, this property. We lived there until 2008.
My family, I'm gonna speak for them because a lot of them don't speak English. We are a migrant worker family. But a lot of us go to school and do other things now. But we still hold it proud that that's our heritage. That we come here through Texas to Michigan to work in the fields. The way in which my mother tells it, we lived in the migrant worker camps and then we moved into the city, into the Sheldon area, and we lived there for a long time.
So I'm going to take a look for a moment at this neighborhood of Wealthy, Division, Sheldon, and the Lower Wealthy Division corridor.
What is going on here? Well, the new development, the new gentrifying development in this area is that in the late 90s, the residents of the neighborhood got together to organize a sort of charrette in order to organize long-term planning for the neighborhood. And that was really good. It was actually the first time we were able to get the landowners and the hospitals and everyone together and talk it over. So, a couple years after that, this major housing organization downtown decided to organize another charrette where they were actually able to get a grant and bring in some consultants and architects and everyone. And that ended up being another sort of 2-day charrette. But after that, nothing happened. We heard nothing.
When I drive down Wealthy Street, I get so angry. I cannot even describe it to you. I get so angry. I'm thinking, oh, now it's safe for y'all to be here. Now y'all want to be here. And not only do y'all want to be here, you're taking over here. So you move in a little bit. You buy one little shop, and then you buy another little shop, and then they don't even serve the folks in the neighborhood. They aren't even priced for the folks in the neighborhood to shop there. You don't even hire the folks in the neighborhood to work there.
As an Asian family, people just assume that we don't have any racism against us, but we are dealing with our own kind of racial discrimination. From the black guys in the neighborhood calling us chinks and slanties to people just assuming that we're a certain way. Anyhow, so we put everything we had into that house, and it was in okay shape, but it was in a slum. I won't deny that, but my family put all that we had into it.
In 2004, that same housing organization came back and organized yet another charrette. And at that time, of course, one of the main things that the neighborhood did not want to see happen was for the neighborhood to change, for the values of their properties to increase to the point where they'd get priced out. They wouldn't be able to afford their taxes, etc., etc. And of course, we had a commitment from that organization for that not to happen. But again, nothing. We heard nothing until 2008 or 2009.
And I don't even want to go downtown or on Wealthy anymore. That used to be my turf. It ain't anymore. What is it?
And my family, we lived there for a long, long time. And it must have been after the Great Collapse. And we owned that home. We lost it. And my father, he cried. He just sat there and cried.
My family had to split up. We moved from this one house where all of us had been living in together to these smaller houses and apartments down in Brentwood, right? That's the name. And we lost what little we had built in this country. And I've seen it destroy my parents, my aunt and uncle, and it makes me bitter too. Like, that was the house that I grew up in, and it's gone. They actually tore it down to build, a parking lot. Around there are other expensive apartments too.
All of a sudden, on the front page of the Grand Rapids Press, there's this photo of the director of that same organization standing at the corner of Division and Wealthy and announcing this new project called Tapestry Square. See, we had thought nothing was happening because all these years we were hearing nothing back. But what this organization, these people were actually doing was buying up all of the vacant properties and then buying out residents on the 400 block of Sheldon so that they could completely redesign the neighborhood, which is, of course, completely outside of and against the wishes of the residents that they had been meeting with for several years during these charrettes. And they can keep saying that they're putting in affordable, market rate affordable housing, but the first housing that they put in on Wealthy, that's these loft apartments above commercial properties that the lowest ones start at like $875, $900 a month. This kind of gentrification is happening all over the city now.
And I know what it is. It's white gentrification, pure and simple. Pushing folks of color out so the white hipsters come back in the city. But we're not solving any problems in our community. We're just building more lines, stacking them and stacking them.
And we lost everything. Our house, my mom, my dad, my aunties, my uncles. We were voiceless.
What we had built was lost.
Well,
the community in this East Hills uptown area, because that's certainly what I've been focused on, okay? From Union Street to East Town, from Wealthy to Fulton, okay? And we found that these driving corridors have always been very active, and they're really very good economic corridors. And so what we decided to do was to look at that from a business standpoint and to work on the commercial districts along these corridors.
And so now we've been labeled a corridor improvement district, which means folks get some tax advantages or monies to start a business. So when I keep telling these white folks who know entrepreneurial, marketing, accounting, whatever you need to know, because I know 3 or 4 people. I know 2 Africans, I know an African American, I know a Caribbean person. They want to open a restaurant, they want to open a store. Why don't you help them?
You know, it isn't something we say, I don't want to be around white people, or I don't want to be around black people. It's just, you know, for example, as we sit here in this restaurant today, there are no people of color here, and that's not something you or I had anything to do with, you know? There's no signs like Jim Crow, like if you're a certain color, you're not allowed in here. It's just somehow we know that that's how we behave, and so we behave that way. And as related to Wealthy Street, you know, the more wealthy of a crowd begins to move in there, do business there, shop there, it by nature, by default almost, leaves people out.
And I know that Wealthy is a more popular spot because they open up a lot more bars, and I ain't got no bar that I can, you know, go in and feel comfortable because there's more white. I ain't seeing nobody of my color in there.
The people who have moved in here think it's a great location, and whatever race they are. And the people who have been here have labeled it, and that social labeling says that this is the ghetto. I had an African American person, middle-class guy, well-dressed, come in here to this building just the other day to look to want to rent something here. And he proceeded to tell me that this building wasn't worth it because this is the ghetto.
Remember how we were having this conversation about how Wealthy is changing, how it's not going to be black anymore? That absence, oh my God, it's turning white. It's terrible. Well, can we back up for a moment and actually take a look at what it is we're defending? That bodega, that kind of really crappy laundromat, that restaurant you never actually see anybody in. I mean, really, that's what you're trying to protect? Wouldn't you rather have a fresh organic food market instead of a food desert? Wouldn't you rather have restaurants that you'd actually want to eat at?
You know that bar that used to be on Wealthy and Diamond? It used to be called the Two Stands Bar. And it was a mixed bar, minorities and everything. And I don't know if the owner died or whatever, but the bar closed. And there was this black businessman who wanted to open the bar. No, they won't give him a license. But they said there's not going to be a bar there anymore. There's a bar there now.
This bar used to be called the Two Stands Bar, and it was one of those places where we didn't know if we could come. You know, we would say things like, hey, we're white, can we come in? And this bar closed in like 97, 98, and then it just sat there empty. So in 2002, we bought it, but we had to replace everything, and it took us ages. I mean, the foundation was rotten. We had to like hoist up the building and re-pour the foundation.
I've got a friend, an African American, who has lived here a lot longer than I have. And one night we were out and about, and we decided to go down to the Meanwhile. So we get there, and he looks inside the door and he says, I can't do it. I ask him why not, and he says, I just can't do it. Later on, he confided to me that partly it's because I used to come here when it was Two Stands, and it was a black neighborhood bar, and I don't see black people coming here anymore.
You're right. It's hard, you know, as you say. The gentrification word gets thrown around all the time, and my friends are like, how do you feel about being part of the gentrification? And I'm like, I honestly don't feel like I'm part of the gentrification. I mean, it's not like I moved into a building that was Renaissance zone.
Now, I've been in the same house for over 20 years, 2 blocks from here, 1 block from 6th Miss School. Now, I've seen the neighborhood turn over 3 times in terms of gentrification. Move out again, gentrification. And you know, now we have more Caucasians on my block than we have had in over 20 years. That is not such a bad thing, but it's not such a good thing. I'm there, I'm not moving. I got a palace in the middle of the hood. I've been there 20 years. I got grass, I got a yard. It's about principle.
Like I said, I lived here 40 years and I've seen a lot of changes in that time, and sometimes I feel threatened by them changes. But this is my house all the time, and I'm not leaving no matter how much it changes. This house is all I got.
Ready,
Yeah.
and
Slide.
and slide.
1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Charter, Christian, Catholic, private, Montessori, public, Forest Hills, East Kentwood, EGR Central. Charter, Christian, Catholic, private, Montessori, public, Forest Hills, East Kentwood, EGR Central.
When you asked me what is Grand Rapids like educationally, and I said it's a good place to raise your kids, I immediately realized my filter is different, because that's something I used to say for 30, 40 years, but I'm starting to realize that I don't believe that.
Mi familia, mi family, we come to GR and we cross country from Texas as migrant workers to escape from my father, who was abusive, extreme, mean. The night before we fled, he tried to bite off my madre's ring by the, with his teeth. We come across border in the 90s as family, and when I was a little older when we get to GR, like 10, but they put me in 3rd grade in GR Public.
So I've been going to Grand Rapids public schools my whole life. I'm a product of such. And oftentimes I was one of the only white kids in my school, and I experienced racism. You know, it taught me that racism can occur anywhere. So this one time in this class full of like black kids and brown kids, you know, when the teacher was out of the room, they just ganged up on me. They started circling around me, first like poking me, calling me names like a white boy, pale face, and a faggot. And I'm just this geeky, scrawny white kid.
The teachers are what saved me. The structure sucks. It just sucks. I mean, the lack of discipline. I mean, you can put kids in uniforms, but the behavioral changes have to start at a self-work, grassroots level. I had a friend who went all the way through with me from like pre-K to sophomore year, and he never graduated. Never. Shit, yeah. I just remember seeing a change in him, like losing his self-worth from being treated like he was nothing. And then he started acting like that too. So eventually he just got kicked out and never came back.
I couldn't speak English. I mean, I couldn't communicate. And there was a lot of Hispanic kids in our class, and our teacher didn't speak Espanol. So I never really learned how to read. So when I got to middle school, they just put me in special education. I just kept getting pushed through.
I just remember that over and over, it was just this mode of survival. Like, eventually, I just told my mom I didn't want to go back to school because it was too tiring, you know? It was just stressful and exhausting, and all the white kids and the black kids and the Latino kids all just walking down different parts of the hall, sitting at different tables, you know, just separation. And you never knew when it was going to erupt into a fight.
I moved around from school to school because I played sports, and A coach actually told me that I could make it just on sports and I didn't need to worry so much about academics, but my mom taught me differently. And they actually tried to recruit me at East Grand Rapids High School, but my mom said she didn't want me to go to such a segregated school.
Well, our kids are in GR Public. And, we have friends who are frantically trying to get their kids into schools of choice or into the Christian school system. And, it's not because they're really hell-bent on being in the Christian school system. I'm misphrasing there. But, they just think that the public school system is a mess. And our confrontation with them is always, you're not participating in changing the system. So you can't talk about it, just don't say anything. So we'll be at parties where we just have to stop talking about the public schools because we're just really strong believers in the fact that it's way beyond the fact that, the superintendent's gonna come in and save the day. This is gonna come down to the schools themselves.
Just graduated from Grand Rapids Public School. I like to go to school, but I think it's the fear of violence that stops me from going, It stresses me out. I can't think, I can't focus. And here's the thing with these schools. They are loud. And I have 6 siblings, and I am the oldest, and they are loud. You just can't think.
I founded a different kind of school, Potter's House School, because when I had first graduated from college and I was teaching in the public schools, I could see that the learning was not effective, even though a lot of the people teaching were good people, good teachers. The system of education is broken, and what it would take to fix it is a tremendous will of the people to dedicate themselves to that fact.
There is a little boy. His mother is dead, his father is nowhere to be found, and his grandmother raised him. He goes to school and just disappears. He is a person of color, a native of this land. He is a member of a disappearing race. This is me. This is my story.
Well, we were married straight out of college, and we settled in a small starter home down near Southeast Grand Rapids. I'm a pre-K teacher, and we just love this city. We've been living here for a few years now, and I'm pregnant. Thank God I'm not sick today. So we're just trying to decide what to do. Do we stay here, or do we move to where there are better schools?
And when I say that the schools are loud, it's that, so I'm on student leadership and things, and there is just not enough respect, The other day I was walking down the hall, and this kid spit at me and another teacher, and then acted like he was just spitting in general. But I know he was spitting at us. That's the kind of stuff.
I moved to Grand Rapids as I was recruited by a major company here in town. Now, when people see me, a successful black man who dresses, snazzy, as some of my friends might say, they always ask me, "Where are you from?" As if a professional black man must be from somewhere else. I am from somewhere else. We started out by sending our kids to Grand Rapids Public Schools, and we pulled them out after 3 months.
So one of the places that I would take my kids is Wealthy Park Schools. And we would sit at a picnic table, and they would do their homework and play, and I could keep them out of my hair while I studied for my own school.
At home, I only read in Spanish, and my mom only speaks to me in Spanish, but by this time I was in middle school and in special education. I just kept getting depressed because I just keep thinking, I'm worthless and I'm making it. My mom getting abused all the time, and I can't do nothing but sit there. I had no father figure. I just barely made it through middle school. I got kicked out 4 times, and I went to juvie, I think, 3 times.
And I kept getting told by my mom, who's a pastor, that I just need to work harder to make friends and bridge racial divides. And, she put me in Grand Rapids Public Schools because it's what she believed in.
And it's what she could afford.
So I stayed in GR Public and I did graduate thanks to some super dedicated, exceptional teachers. But the system is not improving. They're still putting band-aids on it like starting special schools. But brown people are still suffering.
I was in college before I realized what had happened to me. That I had been robbed of my identity and swirled into the myth of the melting pot. A teacher once told me, "You are all the same. You are no different from this boy or that boy." She pushed this at me, and it's not true. We are not all the same.
People want to mentally ascend to the idea of diversity for their children, but they don't want to do the work that diversity demands.
And so I don't know if it was like the first day of school or something, but they had like whole pizzas that they were just giving kids. I'm used to cookies on a table. You take one and you keep on going. And so sometimes I would bring a pizza to the park and we would sit and eat. And there's this one time that there were these white kids and they just stared very hard.
And I'm tired of being told that I went to or I go to a failing school, you know? I mean, I got almost all A's in school, and then I went and got an 18 on my ACT. I mean, what's that? You know what that is? That is them just passing us through and then throwing things like vocational training and online education at us. I mean, what is that? You know what that is.
And so my daughter was like, "Mom, why are they looking at us like this?" Just smile and say hi. So they was like, "Hi." And as soon as they spoke, those white kids jumped up and turned around. So I asked one of the parents, "Excuse me, ma'am, how do you go about, is this like a scout thing or something like that?" Oh no, you have to live in this area to go to this school. Well, that's odd because I really do live in this area and we were looking at coming to this school. Oh, I don't know. You'll just have to call the school. And that was it. And it really hurt me because as an adult, I've experienced it. But when my kids experienced it, their last words to me were, "Mom, I don't ever want to go to this school."
Our school is different. It is income sensitive and the parents are required to be involved. Diversity takes a tremendous amount of work. Intentionally, daily, hour by hour, minute by minute, second by second work. The story of Potter's House is the story of that work.
We moved here in order to expose our kids to a global environment. And do you know that the only place you can get that is in the Kentwood schools? There are 56 different languages and 53 different nations represented in that district. Do you know you can't get that amount of exposure even in the private schools?
That's why I am here at Literacy Center. It's like, you know, when I read, I try to comprehend what I read, but my mind be here, but not here, you know? So, without a father figure in my life, I've been through a lot of stuff. I go to jail, I've been in prison, but that's not me. But I get pulled in, and the kids will say, you know, things, you know. So you find some guy who's like 23 years old, and I'm like 16, and I want to prove myself. And he used to get kids around my age to like break into houses and cars and stuff, and drugs, selling drugs for him. And I got caught. He don't get caught, you know. And I drop out, and the selling drugs is easy because I can sell a lot and fast and have monies. I got no education except working on street. I got no history of working except working on street.
So it's really hard to try and make it when you went to a school that didn't serve you, you know? I mean, I go to GRCC now because that's the only place I could go. Would I have liked to have gone to Michigan? Yeah, sure. I don't know. I just feel like these schools failed me, you know? And I love to go to school. But I don't want to be too hard on them because they are trying. They are trying.
And in the end, I graduated, like just barely, just barely. And I didn't go to college, so I'm not this model white boy. I'm okay, but I probably should have been arrested a few times for some of the stuff I did way back then. I mean, I see black kids, brown kids getting arrested over a lot less.
Now I'm a part of Black Lives Matter. And we gotta support our public schools, but we also need to challenge them. A complete revolution in education. Because if you stay in an incredibly broken system, what's the point? The cost is high. You know what they say, right? If we were to spend what it cost us in a prisoner to prison, we'd have the most educated society on the planet. Think of that. So many of my friends been arrested, in and out of jail. The new Jim Crow prevails. I'm a lucky one.
Native children have different needs than children of African heritage, or children of Asian heritage, or children of Hispanic heritage. And this isn't about putting our heritage on display at cultural festivals, although those are nice. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to wear my heritage clothing and dance. But this was degrading, because it was only a display, not any work towards deep-seated change. And I will be told, but we appreciate you, your heritage. Your appreciation is a form of cultural genocide.
So with 82% poverty in the Grand Rapids public school system, that's children coming from houses eligible for free and reduced lunches, poverty households. The issues that kids bring in Grand Rapids Public are different and are more expensive to address than the issues that the kids bring in Forest Hills.
And so I do it. I'm involved in the public schools every day. Even though I work, I'm involved. I'm there. And now our oldest is right here in middle school in this very neighborhood. And I see my neighbors taking their kids out to charter schools, to Christian schools. But what if we took that money and those resources and put them into our public schools? What if?
So we're just trying to decide what to do, and my husband, he's white. He wants to move, and me, I'm Asian. I want to stay here no matter how hard it is. We're divided on the issue, and it's hurting our marriage, actually. I can really feel that. We'll probably move.
As I stated before, we took our kids out of GR Public because they kept being targeted by teachers for various things. We feel that there's too much targeted racism in the schools, so we moved from downtown GR to a suburb where there are better schools and better integration. You know, Kenwood is doing a model job of integration, and other schools ought to take some notice.
I have a mentally disabled 70-year-old neighbor who gets drunk and calls me a fucking peckerwood every night. I'm like, peckerwood? Where does that word even come from? But just like fucking honky and get out of his neighborhood. And him, while I'm trying to eat dinner outside with my family, calling me a fucking honky is part of my reality. And stepping over chicken bones on the way home and just dealing with neglect, houses that are shuttered, windows that are broken, dog crap in the alley, and that's all of the bad stuff. And there's a lot of good stuff too, but Grand Rapids Public is a mix of good and bad. And if it fails, we're to blame. That's the way we look at it.
I teach at GRPS, and I always hear, we need you. We need teachers like you. And my dilemma is, we're out there. You're just not hiring us. And that's what they were saying in the classroom. Oh my gosh. I've never worked with black kids before. I've never worked with these types of kids. Where are you from? I'm from the Upper Peninsula.
I teach a lot about inequality. It's my primary subject. The narrative in America is that America is this great country because we had all these natural resources to build this wonderful country. And I just want to say, wait a minute. Those resources you're talking about were stolen from the Native Americans. And the free labor to build this wonderful country was stolen also. America is great because they got free labor and free land. And let me tell you, if a country can't make it with free labor and free land, if they can't be great on that, then that's a sorry story. And yet, we just sit back and say, oh, but that was a long time ago. It has no effect today. Of course, it has an effect today, and it will continue for many generations unless there's some sort of an intervention, a cultural intervention.
I hear now. I'm learning to read. And I got a job as a carpenter, you know? And I try not to go back to jail because, you know, I'm scared of that. I hear now. I'm learning to read. And I learned to speak English better, too. I don't need a father. I need myself. I need teachers like these here literacy center to make me good. I don't want to be the burned up guys who's been in and out of jail forever. I know what I want. I want education. I didn't get it from the system. I get it now.
Privilege!
We need to begin to fundamentally understand the implications of this. How can we deny it?
I don't get it. Open your eyes. How can you deny it? This is the line.
We think about privilege being one of those things that the white man has that we don't have.
With the Asian population, people are like, well, it doesn't really exist for you, right? Like, there's no racism against you.
When are we going to admit that the Latino population of this city has to have a real leadership presence? We are a big part of this city, but you may never see it from what's visible in the leadership.
I see it. I see it every day. Let me tell you about some of my experiences.
I've been trying to break down this thing we call privilege, and it is the hardest thing. The hardest thing.
So I was a social worker for about 10 years, and my focus was on homelessness. And I remember my first few days at the Salvation Army, sitting at the desk. I was 23 years old, right out of college, and I was shocked. And I apologize for not having the statistics, but the number of black folks coming in versus white was absolutely astounding. I mean, it was well into the 70, 80, 90% of people coming in. There were always more black folks coming into programs that were aimed towards poverty.
Defining myself, I've had to deal with this thing called privilege, and it's hard to put my finger on how to define it, but I'll tell you a story about how it affected me in school. So, I'm sitting in class, and this guy just assumes that because I'm Asian, I can help him with math. Or another one, that I don't need scholarships because my family is the model minority or whatever. It's just these assumptions that people can make that really just shows how stupid the whole thing is.
And so there I was, telling these middle-aged black women with children how to move on in life. I mean, looking back on it, it was absolutely absurd when what these people were dealing with was wages not keeping up with housing prices.
And the idea that in this country you can do anything you want because you can simply pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all that sort of thing. Well, what became clear to me is that this is not a country where everyone can simply pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I mean, simply because many people don't get boots. And sometimes we give people boots, but we don't give them the straps to pull them up with. And we do that intentionally. It isn't just by accident. And sometimes we only do that to make us feel good. Oh, we gave you boots, but we didn't give them the straps to pull them up with. You see what I mean?
I mean, I was happy to have a job, don't get me wrong. I mean, it was amazing to help these people, but you see, I saw homelessness as an economic issue and not a behavioral one. I mean, maybe it was behavioral for about 5-10% of the population with severe addictions and mental illness, but for 90% of those people, it was strictly economic.
I don't think I am doing something bad. I think I am raising a kid. And you can do one or two things. You can raise your kids, or you can work hard and not see your kids raising how they raising. I just think my kids turn differently when you not put too much attention to them. And I don't think there is something wrong with me as a mom alone, But I do think there is something standing in my way, whether it be the color of my skin or hair or my being immigrant. I don't know.
I mean, what these people needed was money for their rent. That's what they needed. And most of my clients had full-time jobs at McDonald's or wherever, but they were not being paid enough to cover their rent and utilities.
And I went to apply for cash assistance, and I think at the time I work at McDonald's and I make like $80 a week. And so I told her, the social worker, that I have only that. And she said, that is a lot of money, so she cannot help me. So $80? $80 is good enough money to survive?
I encountered a graduate student in one of my classes on diversity and inclusion who said to me, I've gone through all this university and I have never heard of white privilege, and I don't believe in it. I had her read Tim Wise. Boy, did that make her mad. She said, I don't believe it exists. And she gave me this example. She said, and I mean, you're not going to believe this. She said, if two men went to get a job as broadcasters, one was black and one was white, and then the white one was learning disabled and couldn't talk, who would get the job? And I said, well, you would have to start with them both being equally qualified. Well then, white privilege isn't true. A refusal to think logically.
It's a white town. Grand Rapids is a white town. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, it's just like whiteness is thick. And I'm using that in a sociological descriptive. It's just thick.
I think there's something to race that plays a big part in this town. Like the way I got my car from that nice Dutch guy who owns a car dealership, and he's helping me out. And I'm thinking, man, am I perpetuating this thing right now? I really need a car. But how do I maintain my self-respect, and how do we have a relationship where it doesn't create this dynamic to where I am beholden to him?
But I got a problem with us, okay? It seems like every time I'm around family, you know, mother, brother, sister, aunt, or just people that I know, and we're in a situation that requires that we interact with white people. Now follow me now. Are you following me? Okay. Now, what I found is that there's this sort of unspoken sort of a shuck and jive that black people do in this town, because it's like, it's kind of hard to describe. You almost have to see it.
I think you can learn to survive in Grand Rapids as a poor black person, especially if you're a poor black person with some personality. And you can survive because people want to help you. And then you nice on top of that, and you love Jesus, and you can sing, then they really want to help you. And so we have this paternalistic theme, which creates this really funky dance we do that the white folks and people of color do, that the white folks and people of color do really well, really well.
My mom does it a lot, okay? Now, I was at the hospital with my mom the other day, right? And I'm kind of a nut. I like to make people laugh, you know what I'm saying? So my nephew was getting his throat worked on, and there's this nurse there, and I'm just laughing and talking with her about whatever. And my mom apologizes for me, as if I've done something wrong, because I decided to have a sense of humor with a white person. And she says,
Oh, don't mind him. He's an actor.
And she puts on this voice that's just, it's not her. You know, that super sweet, polite shit that is obviously designed to make somebody really like you.
Americans who come from other metropolitan cities say that black folks in this town have a plantation mentality. We can't do nothing without our white folks. We can't do nothing against our white folks, and we certainly can't do nothing on our own. So that's the dynamic that we have.
When I look at my neighbor, Bobby, who is 15, very bright, an entrepreneur, but has made the very conscious decision to not elevate his speech. I mean, his brothers both speak, or can speak, very polished professional English. So obviously there's a very great degree of agency of choice in that linguistic decision to not speak, well, white, you know? But like not really white, more like King's English, I guess you could call it. It's just more like, you know, I don't know how to call it. You could say more polished, whatever loaded word you wanted to use, I guess. So you know what I mean though? It's kind of like white, but not really white necessarily. Kind of like an Indian American person, you know? They talk that way, but you wouldn't say they're white. I mean, right? Right? So I guess what I'm saying is it actually kind of like British maybe? You know, British?
I remember listening to my mom talk to businesses on the phone, and she would change her voice and speak really proper English. And so I asked my daughter that, can you tell when I'm talking to white folks on the phone? And she said, you change the way you talk. You change the way you speak.
We moved to Grand Rapids from New York to, you know, start a family and create opportunities for our kids. But here's something that you really have to ask yourself. How is it that we are in the top cities for families and the lowest cities for people of color? How can we be on both lists? Something's out of whack, way out of whack.
My story is about privilege. I wasn't held back by it, but I feel it every day.
So I learned in a class I took about racism, about microaggressions, and I had never really thought about it, but it's like this.
I'm standing in the elevator, and this has happened on multiple occasions, especially in parking ramps. Someone will actually reach out and touch my hair. Oh, it's just so interesting. I just had to touch it. As if that's okay. I mean, you're standing there without being engaged with even a hello, and someone, a stranger, has reached out and touched your hair. There were so many messages around that. One, they thought they had the right to do it. Two, I'm an object of interest, total disrespect. It's just ignorance, and it's those things.
Hair. Mine is long and straight. I'm standing in line at the grocery store, and the lady standing behind me just reaches out and strokes my head. Seriously, it scared the shit out of me. What gives her the right?
So my mama has this taco place, right? And it closed down. So tell me, why is it that the hipster taco place on Wealthy Street can make it, but my mama's shop can't? Location. Location is privilege, right? So why is it that her shop can't be there? I mean, she had to save her money for years and years. She had to get away from my abusive alcoholic dad, and she got out, right? And she just kept saying, I'm gonna make this thing work. Because I always told her that she could. And she's the best cook. Man, yeah, I know every son thinks his mom's the best cook, but she really is, okay?
And it starts early too, this thing. So I was working at a shop in the mall, and this little white girl asks me,
How'd your eyes get that way?
and she pulls her eyes back with her fingers, and her mom just laughs and says nothing.
Oh.
Nothing.
I feel like I've always had to fight against a bias. The bias that I wouldn't be able to succeed, that I wouldn't be able to speak proper English, that I wouldn't be able to handle difficult concepts. I felt this in school, and sometimes I feel it today, even though I have a PhD. Just the assumption. I'm getting a loan, and the lady thinks that she has to speak very slowly and explain things carefully. That's a microaggression.
So we help her out, yeah, me and my bros. We find a good spot for her in a high traffic area, and we paint it, and we clean it up, and we get her set up. And she is so very grateful, but she has to do this all with her own savings because she can't get a loan. So she could maybe have made it if she could have afforded a liquor license, or maybe a little money for marketing, but first she had to close down because the utilities. The utilities. So she gets set up again, but then has to close down a second time because somebody broke into her shop, broke some glass, stole some stuff, and all of a sudden the insurance premiums go up. Then
The third time was the final because she got held up in her own store, man. After that, she said she couldn't take it anymore and she quit. She still makes tamales for people on order, but instead of thriving, she's surviving.
And I'm just gonna pick on this for a sec because I am so tired in this day and age. I go out to the new outlets and I'm looking for pantyhose and all they have are white lady colors. I've been dealing with this my whole life and there are still only a couple of stores where I know I can go and get my color. Come on.
What do we need here? Total transformation. A system to fight white privilege that gives people of all walks access to resources. Makes demands on our system to provide folks with better opportunities.
I can remember overhearing a conversation between my parents about a guy that my dad called a Negro, and my dad just being real upset because this guy had gotten a job over another white guy at the factory. And my dad was just furious because he said it was wrong. And then he'd tell us how lucky we were to be living where we were living and going to school where we were and going to church where we were. I had no sense, really, of anything outside of East GR. And I think a lot of people, especially kids there, are like that. Just this total sense of enclosure, I guess. I didn't come into contact with race stuff with anyone different from me until I went to college. I want to fight against white privilege, but how?
What am I supposed to do?
I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed.
You know that white privilege walk? The game they make you play
I
where
can
you
take a
have to
job
take a
with an
step
affirmative
forward
action
for every
employer
question
without
you can
having
answer yes
coworkers
to.
on the job suspect that I got
I had to
it
play
face
that
to
for one of my
face.
classes.
If a traffic cop pulls me over or the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. I am never asked to speak for all the people of my racial group. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race.
I resisted the Institutes for Healing Racism for a long time. I said, I'm already very sensitized, thank you, I don't need this. But finally I did, and it really kind of cracked me open in a way that surprised me. I think typically near the end, maybe even the last session, is the experience where you all line up against the wall and then you take a step forward if you can answer the question affirmatively.
And I just couldn't take the steps forward. I was just hanging out in the back, and it surprised me, and probably everyone else.
I can criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider.
And I guess the assumption is that my skin color doesn't really matter in this privilege thing, but it does. And in the discussion after, none of my classmates could look at me, and I felt even more isolated. I don't like that game.
After a dozen or so questions, realizing that all of us white people were all the way out here, and the classmates that we'd gotten to know, or maybe even knew before we came in, are all the way back there, a step or two from the wall. And we're halfway across the room. What a powerful moment that was. It was sort of an instant. I wept. Midway through the exercise, which seemed interminable, my black colleague had tears on her face. And I was thinking, I began really reflecting on how I treat her. All the invisible lines, these color lines that we draw without even realizing it.
Get down on the ground!
Hey, you have the right!
comprehensive change. What is happening in this nation to black and brown people is reprehensible. In a nation that counts itself as educated, we have more people in prison than the entire population of Canada or something like that. We love to throw around these facts and statistics about police violence and incarceration rates, about dropout rates and the school-to-prison pipeline. We love our statistics. But how do we turn them around? To turn them around or not to turn them around? That is the question.
So I come to this country before I was born. My mom, she carried me across the border inside her, and many people accused her of only coming to this country because she wanted an American baby, but she did not know. I believe her.
Little injustices. They get to me. DWB, driving while black, whatever. My husband and I work at the same place over in Kentwood by the Woodland Mall, and we usually drive separately because we work at separate times. And my plan of action is just to go straight shot down hall through EGR. And this one time, due to a car situation, we had to drive together. And he takes this huge detour all the way to 28th Street. And I'm like, why are you doing this? And he says, oh, I don't go in there. In there? EGR? No way. No cop is gonna destroy my day. Yeah.
So this thing about the police picking on people of color for no reason, well, I just see that as unjust. I mean, they just assume all the time that my brother is in some Vietnamese gang, even though he's not. He just likes to dress that way because it's the fashion or whatever. This one time, I was in the car with him, and the cops, we were on division, pulled him over. Make him get out of the car, make me get out of the car.
This your girlfriend?
No, she's my sister.
They frisk us both. They do not have probable cause.
Look, we're very, very sympathetic to all the stories that you're telling us about what happens in all such scenarios. We're worried about injustices against all people. I'm particularly worried about it in light of the incredible reign of police brutality cases that we've seen show up this year.
So December 23rd, I've gone shopping for food for a friend's Christmas party. And when I got home, my back door was the glass pane had been shattered. And my guitar was just lying there in the doorway. And my first thought was, oh my God, did I leave? You know, the kind of crazy thoughts that occur to you when you see something like that. And then all at once I realized my house had been broken into.
And I just kept thinking to myself, please, 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 don't let this be a black guy, a person of color, because, you know, I'm a professor and I do all of this anti-racism work in my classes. And I ask my students to do this one honesty exercise about race where I get them to close their eyes and picture who might be breaking into their car, into their home, stealing their bicycle, and for 99.9% of my white students, they always picture a black guy committing the crime.
So after it happened, I kind of felt like, and this is so very not appropriate, but I kind of felt like maybe how a woman feels after a rape, you know, like I wasn't supposed to talk about it. Like, you know, like I'd done something to invite this robbery. I was white and I was rich and I had left the blinds open, which I had, so anyone could just look in and see my shit and probably figure the house was good enough to break into. And there had been 54 break-ins in 45 days in Grand Rapids, so it's not like I was alone.
And so they finally caught the guy, young black guy, 17 years old. And I was so disappointed because I was so trying to change the way in which I think about who commits crimes. And it just made me so sad. And I didn't know what to do.
And, you know, I just felt compelled after that happened to just talk to other people who had been a part of the crime wave in the area, especially people living in my neighborhood. So there was this one fellow a block over from me on Sherman, and his house had been broken into like 3 times in the space of a month and a half. His response was, I've been thinking about getting a gun, and sometimes I think I should just sit in my son's room with a gun and
in a rocking
wait.
chair and just wait.
And you know what? I totally related to that, because after it happened to me, my first thought was, what do I do? Should I get a gun?
Yes, Black Lives Matter. better. I go to every rally and everything that I can because both me and my son been a part of this injustice. Body cams or no body cams, injustice still gonna go down. Jacked up is what it is. I'll tell you the story of my brother.
And my mom did a pretty good job of raising us, but sometimes, all the time, she had to work at night. So I got stuck raising my sister. And one night when I'm 13, my mom doesn't come home at all. And there's no food in the house, so I go and I steal some. And I get caught. And I go to juvie. And I got out, but that marred me. And I ended up not graduating high school. A while later, I got picked up for stealing again. And this time, I was with my friend who sells drugs. So I got written up as selling drugs too. And then I went to prison.
He's a good kid. I'm telling you, he's a good kid. A brother to everyone. Anyway, he's on his way home from church. And he gets pulled over. He's driving my friend's car.
So I got out, but like many of my friends in these situations, I'm scared of going back in. So now I'm working. And I say that I try not to drive, but instead to take the bus because nobody bothers me. And I try to steer clear of trouble, but trouble is everywhere for us.
And I didn't know my friend had drugs in the car when I let him borrow it. So anyway, that's how this all started. My brother is innocent, but they pull him out of the car and they hurt him. Nearly break his arm checking him out.
Like, on the one hand, I want to be able to say that Grand Rapids is a safe place to live, but on the other hand, I think again, race shapes that. I might be able to say that it's a safe place, but I'm not walking around with this skin color that adds a whole other level of complexity to my safety.
And we're always afraid, I'd say, living in fear. You know what that does to a person? Raises your cortisol, your stress, causes early death. So if we're not being killed by the police, we're being killed from living in fear. Anyway, so they put my brother in the cop car and they were laughing at him because he was wearing a suit and tie coming back from church. And they was talking about how much trouble he was going to be in. And they were making fun of him saying, selling drugs at church, shame on you. Stuff like that. Hands up, don't shoot. 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 Hands up, don't shoot.
Man, I'm used to it, man. It's like, I bet with my friends now, like, man, I bet they stop us. And then they do. I mean, it's like, it is what it is. It's like, I just know when they gonna stop me.
I saw this boy, a black boy, probably about 17 or 18 years old, and he's just, driving his car right over here on Alger, and I'm just walking my dog and minding my own business, and then right at this corner, these two cop cars just block this kid and make him stop driving. Basically, they just tell him to get out of the car.
Get out of the car!
And put his
Put
hands
your
up,
hands
and
up.
I was just really scared because I had no idea at all what was going on.
And so he gets taken in, and he gets time because they can't decide, but they can't say whether it was or it wasn't his drugs. And so he gets time also because they say he resisted arrest. But what he said was, officers, I'm innocent. This isn't my car. And they was like, this isn't your car? Well, you should check more carefully the vehicles you drive. And when he gets into court, it's like a done deal. He gets time. He marched now. How he escaped from that? How he now walk around with fear and bitterness in him?
They pushed him down on the ground, and then that one white cop put his foot on the kid's head, and I just kept watching from some distance back. I don't even know why. They frisked him down on the ground, and then I actually saw that other cop kick the kid in the ribs. And then they just kind of cuffed him and threw him in the back of the police car, and I distinctly heard the N-word used against that boy, and I was so shocked that I didn't get license plates or anything.
I do think the police force is doing their darndest to keep things chill out there, but it gets hot everywhere, and we are poised for injustice to occur. A culture of injustice exists.
I know I never committed a crime, so it's like, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of that. I ain't afraid of the police, no. But it's just,
I hate it when they do that because I thought they was only supposed to stop somebody when they see something out of order. But anyway, you know, last time they stopped us, it was like a week ago. There's construction on my street, and it was me and four of my my friends. And we was on the corner, and the police just swarm up on us like 2-3 cars, and everybody's silent. And I ain't never been the silent type. So I'm like, why are we being stopped? We just walking down the street. He's like,
You guys are in the street. We're just looking out for your safety.
Like, there's no cars gonna be coming down this street. It's a construction zone. But anyway, he like put me in the back of the car and just like ran my name. And it's like he thought I was lying about my name for some reason because he couldn't find my name in the system. And I'm like, you're not gonna find my name in the system because I'm not in the system.
But I did call to make a complaint, and they had me come in and fill out some paperwork, so I tried to make a difference there, but I didn't know what else to do. I mean, what do you do? I'm just like some 30-something white woman with what I feel is like no power in a situation like that. I mean, do you just walk up to them and tell it like it is? And then I didn't follow up on the paperwork for like 3 months or something. But I called back later because it was still bothering me. And they said the case was under review. That's all. I'm still upset about it, but I don't know what to do. It feels worse than ever that we're moving.
I guess that's how they clean up the neighborhood. Run up on random people.
We've got all these young guys on the force coming in from places, all white communities in places like Rockford, Jenison, So they've got good hearts, but they've got bias. We all do. Question is what to do about it. How can we change? We are only as good as the changes we make.
Let me tell you a story about a little girl. She's 5 years old, is at the mall, and her mom doesn't usually let her go off by herself, but I think it's by Penny's Woodland Mall. There's a little jewelry store, and so her daughter asked her, Mom, can I go over there? And her mom said, Yeah, you can go over there. And she said, I was looking at things, and I would check, and I would see her, and then I looked, and she was gone. She heard an announcement on the intercom. Will the mother of this young lady please come to the security department? The little girl had been in the jewelry store, and she picked up a sparkly back of, I guess it was a piece of earring, and she put it in her pocket. And they kind of intimidated her and took her into this back room and made her empty out her pockets. She's just 5 years old, and it was just a broken piece of jewelry. If this little girl had been white and had picked up this small sparkly thing, somebody would have asked her, Where's your mommy?
In 1980, I'm told there was only 12 prisons in the state of Michigan. Let me let you in on a little secret. About 97% of my congregation either been in jail, know somebody in jail, or on their way to jail, got a husband or a brother or a son in jail. You see what I'm saying?
And what does the prison do? It does a lot of things. It provides jobs for a lot of people. So they're able to farm people out for cheap labor when they're in prison. So it just does a lot of things that continues to carry forward this legacy of slavery, except for under a different guise.
Neighborhood accountability. Neighborhood cops, not police. Neighborhood people working toward justice for themselves. That's what I'd like to see happen. These lives, our lives, matter.
Black lives matter. Brown lives matter. We got to find a different way. What happened to my brother can't happen. Injustice got to end now. by the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning
is the most segregated hour in America.
What do we do with this? What is the difference between separation and segregation? Aren't we allowed to worship as we choose, with whom we choose? Why do I gotta sacrifice my peace to sit with white folks who oppress me all week long?
When I was growing up in the city, there were only about 2 or 3 other Muslims that I knew. A lot has changed since then, since the 1990s up until now, where there are multiple mosques and nationalities of Muslims who worship in the city. So far it's been pretty peaceful, but there have been some incidents.
American people, they did not know about Islam. Who is their prophet? What is their faith? Who is their God? Therefore, still, we divide ourselves on the basis of words. Muslim God is different. Christian God is different.
Jewish God is different.
Actually, this is not the situation. God is one and the same, and he has created the whole universe. So it is the same God, only the words are different. In Arabic, they say Allah. In English, they say God. In Persian, they say Khoda. In Indian language, they say Bhagwan. So these are the different words. And in Jewish, they say Elah. So it isn't different. Only the words are perception is different.
Just this one story I have, but before I say anything, I would just like to say that there are so many refugees in this community of different faiths. Can't we celebrate it and love this? I went to school in Kentwood, and there at least it was respected. But there was this one incident that I remember, and it still hurts. I was out in Rockford for a community event, and I was wearing my headscarf, and I don't usually wear my scarf, but I did on this particular occasion because we were celebrating our heritage. And I had parked a little ways away because it was very crowded, and there was a lot of snow. And all of a sudden, this man started walking next to me, asking me all of these questions. And when I told him that I was Islamic, he said that I was not welcome. And he swiftly moved on. I held my head high and went to the event, but I was scared.
If you look at how the church developed early on in the United States, slaves were asked to become Christians, but they weren't invited into the congregation. And so separation began early on. So I think about African American congregations and how they were places of survival and of rejuvenation. And I think I understand why African Americans want to remain in their own churches.
And because people want church to be that completely comfortable place, churches will not be multicultural. There is nothing comfortable about multiculturalism. It's tense. But people still want church to be that feel-good, comfortable place. But for me, it never has been, you see. Church has always been like my family. Totally dysfunctional, but you can't divorce your siblings.
I recently completed my conversion to Islam, and I wear the scarf when I am in the community, and I have been spit upon twice. We all worship the same God, so I don't see the point in this lack of dignity. The end to discrimination is education. Always education. People do not understand my faith because they have not read the Quran. For that matter, many people have not read the Bible or many other books of faith. I think perhaps worse is my friend's son, who was bullied because of his faith and his race.
I go to an African American church because I need a break. It's not that people aren't welcome, they are, but there is a sense of resistance to integration. My husband and I went to a multiracial church for a long time, and we just felt like we weren't being heard on issues of inclusion and diversity. And we went to the pastor, we went to meetings, we were on board after board, anti-racism committees. Committees don't work. Action works. Anti-racism committees are not action. So we left. I'm so glad we did.
So the story is that he wanted to say his prayers. He has always wanted to say his prayers at the designated times. He is very committed to Islamic education and serious about his faith. And this was a private matter between his family, the administration, and the teachers. They were in meetings, but somehow the other kids at school found out about it. I don't know how, but they found out, and he was seriously bullied. He was even hit a few times, did not fight back.
And that kind of thing that all makes the whole divisions and the issues that much more complicated. So it's hard to separate out what in there is about race and what is about other stuff. Probably impossible to really isolate because it's all mixed up. I think it's a huge and evolving issue, but there's almost no one who can talk about this. That's how I feel. In church and in society in general, it's almost impossible to bring up the subject. Politically, are you kidding? You can't get anywhere. You can't even say the word race.
So we are so proud that our churches are integrated, but are we community? We might be in the same building and sitting next to each other, but is there community? I would venture a guess, no. I'm not gonna sit in a space with white folks who, after I tell my story, they wanna pat me on the back. No, when I say, you know what, my brother's in prison doing 10 to 20, she's gonna say, you know what, my son just got locked up again too, girl. Let's pray for each other. Ain't nothing we can do for each other but to pray for each other.
I just feel like we're useless. I mean, we're part of the problem, not the solution. And that stinks. I'm sitting here, I'm part of the power structure. So that's really hard for me. And I've got a lot of mixed feelings all the time. And I don't know that if I were a young person today, I would stay in the CRC. And I'm a CRC minister. Then again, I don't know that there would be a better place to go.
We think it's normal to worship separately. We think it's normal, but it isn't. And that's where you get manifestations of institutionalized racism. I mean, look at most of our churches. Most of our churches have a picture of a white Jesus. Now, you tell me this. If he was white, how could Mary and Joseph have taken him and hidden him in Egypt? I mean, how could they have taken a blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy and hidden him in a black nation? And that's where you get institutionalized racism. Jesus didn't have a problem with the prostitutes. He didn't have a problem with the tax collectors. He didn't have a problem with the common folk. He had a problem with the religious community because the religious community refused to change.
And so, what I've learned from all the work is that it's never over. And you have to allow for a ton of room for error, and you have to allow for a ton of room for change, and you have to be open and listening. It takes a new kind of listening to get through these changes that we're enduring as faiths and races interact.
We are all one race. Allah, praise be his name, says this. Christ, praise be his name, says this. The Buddha says this. Now, how you've come up to understand this or not to understand this, that is what plays a part in your life. If you are having a faith, because of God's faith and God's education and guidance and commandment, we are all human beings. You have to love each other, but in origin, We are all one race, and that is human being. So I say this, wherever I go, I say to them, to the Christians and Jews and Muslims, so I say, look, we have divided ourselves. God didn't divide ourselves, and we are killing each other. God didn't say to kill each other.
In the beginning, there were no lines. Humanity was made to exist in harmony. There was land, there were people. All of us are one. In the beginning, there were no lines.
How do we create equity?
How do we build equality?
This city could be an example of peace and prosperity.
Excellence in education for all.
What do we have to do?
In the beginning, there were no lines.
How do we value all people?
How do we end mass incarceration?
This city could be an example of peace and prosperity.
We need equal opportunity in jobs.
And housing opportunities for all.
In the beginning, there were no lines.
How do we create the will to change?
Where do we begin?
In the beginning, there were no lines.
Turn the switch on.
It's on. The switch is on. I am not a technical person, even though I work in theater. Can you hear me though? Do I talk about it here? I'm the artistic director of Adaptive Theater. I'm Stephanie Sandberg. This is the first professional theater company in Grand Rapids paying people living and able to work in theater. Commitment to diversity, and we have a commitment to change. And we made this piece with a lot of grants, a lot of help from a lot of people. And part of some of those grants is that we make a report back to the city about what happened when the play was performed and what audiences had to say about certain questions and ideas. So the actors would like 15 minutes of your time. That's all we're asking, and we want to hear your voices, your ideas, your stories. And what's going to happen with this material that we gather from what we wrote in the play, and then also what we collect from audiences, is I'm actually working with a group of high school students in leadership to present that material back to the city at a city council meeting in May. And so, we're happy to share that report with you as well. If you can give us your email address tonight, we'll send you that report as well. Because this is theater for social change. This is not theater that's meant to just sit and be what it is. It's meant to change. And so we're going to try to change policies about things like gentrification procedures and stuff like that in the city. But we can only do that if we hear what you have to say. So please, they're going to divide you into groups and just talk with you for a few minutes and get your ideas, and we really would love to hear. Thank you very much.